on Christmas Eve of 1906 carried a soft chill that settled gently on the skin, the kind that felt more like a whisper than a warning of the cold night ahead. Snow had not yet begun to fall, but the sky held a pale, muted glow that suggested it might begin at any moment. The streets around the station were alive with quiet excitement. Sleigh bells rang faintly from distant carriages, and the warm aroma of roasted chestnuts drifted near the entrance, where a vendor in a heavy wool coat cheerfully served anyone passing by. Inside the station, the tall iron beams and arched ceiling echoed with the calm murmur of travelers preparing for the holiday journey. New York Central Station was busy, yet peaceful in that gentle way only winter evenings could create. Most travelers moved slowly, bundled in thick coats, mufflers, and long gloves. Some carried wrapped gifts tucked close to their chests, while others simply held onto their tickets with a sense of relief that they were going home, or at least going somewhere warm, somewhere familiar. On platform number 6, the Christmas Eve train waited patiently. Its dark green body caught the glow of the lanterns overhead, and faint wisps of steam curled upward from beneath it. The windows shone softly, reflecting the lamps and faint shadows of passengers walking past. The engine hissed with a steady breath, as though the train itself was alive, gathering its strength for the long night journey ahead. People arrived one by one, then in small groups, stepping onto the platform with a kind of quiet anticipation. Among them was an older man wearing a thick gray coat and holding a small leather bag that had clearly been used for many years. His eyes were gentle and observant, watching the movement of the station with calm acceptance. A young woman followed behind him, carefully balancing a small suitcase in one hand and holding the hand of her little boy with the other. The child, perhaps 6 years old, clutched a tiny wooden horse. He lifted it toward the light every few steps, admiring it as though it were the most important treasure in the world. Near the middle of the platform stood a tall, lean man with a notebook tucked under his arm. His gaze moved from person to person, as if studying the details of each life passing around him. His expression wasn't judgmental. Rather, it was thoughtful, the way someone might look when memorizing the world for later. Not far from him, 2 siblings, one a girl of about 12, the other a boy close behind, waited with restless excitement. The boy swung his legs energetically, and the girl kept pulling his coat to steady him, though she smiled each time she did. There was warmth in their closeness, the kind that suggested they were used to being each other's companion in every adventure. A toy maker, carrying a wooden box tied with rope, walked slowly toward the train. His glasses fogged slightly as he breathed into the cold air, and he wiped them with the edge of his scarf. He moved carefully, protecting the box as if something precious inside might break even with the slightest jolt. A doctor in a dark suit followed behind, his step steady and his face composed, though something quiet and heavy lingered in his eyes. These were all passengers who would soon share a journey none of them expected. As the clock neared the hour of departure, the conductor stepped onto the platform. He wore a navy blue uniform with polished brass buttons and a matching cap. His posture was tall and confident, yet there was a softness to him, a gentleness that placed many passengers at ease even before he spoke. He walked down the length of the train, checking the doors, assisting an elderly woman with her luggage, and offering a reassuring nod to a nervous young couple boarding for their first holiday trip together. His movements were smooth and deliberate, as though he had done this thousands of times and still felt a sense of responsibility every single trip. When he reached the center of the platform, he stopped for a moment and took a slow breath, letting his gaze move over the passengers. His expression held something, subtle kindness mixed with experience, care mixed with a quiet sadness. But whatever rested behind his eyes, he kept it tucked away, focusing instead on the comfort of those in his charge. The passengers began to board the train. The older man stepped into the warm interior, followed by the mother and her child, then the siblings, the journalist, the toy maker, and the doctor. The train's wooden interior glowed with a soft golden hue from the lanterns mounted along the walls. Each car carried the scent of polished wood and coal warmth, and the cushioned seats looked inviting against the cold outside. The young boy ran his fingers along the window, admiring the frost beginning to form at the edges. The journalist took a seat near the aisle, opening his notebook and writing a few quiet words before pausing to listen to the faint sounds around him. The toy maker placed his wooden box carefully above his seat, exhaling with relief once it was secure. The siblings settled by the window, sharing a small tin of cookies they had brought from home. Meanwhile, the mother adjusted her son's scarf, brushing a bit of snow from it even though they were already inside. The conductor moved through the aisle, checking tickets with gentle precision. He offered a warm greeting to each person, making sure everyone felt acknowledged. When he reached the older man, he paused a second longer, nodding respectfully. The older man returned the gesture with a slight smile. There was a silent understanding between them, one that needed no words. Outside, the station lights flickered softly against the windows, casting brief reflections that danced across the glass as if saying farewell. More passengers settled in, coats being folded, blankets being spread, and bags being stored. The quiet hum of conversation filled the air, nothing loud, nothing rushed, just the soft murmur of people settling into a long journey ahead. The train's engine let out a low whistle, gentle but steady. A puff of steam rolled outward, drifting up into the chilled air. The conductor stepped back onto the platform briefly, his breath visible in the cold as he made one final inspection. Once he was satisfied, he climbed aboard and closed the door behind him with a firm but careful push. Moments later, the train began to move. It was slow at first, barely noticeable, as though it were waking from sleep. The wheels rolled over the tracks with a rhythmic clatter that blended smoothly into the quiet night. The lights of the station grew fainter as the train slipped farther away, leaving behind the glow of the city and sliding into the darker, quieter outskirts. Inside the train, the movement brought a comforting sway. Passengers leaned back, watching as the last glimmers of the station lights dissolved into the distance. Snow had still not begun to fall, but the air felt heavy with its promise. The sky outside the windows was a soft gray, and the landscape grew quieter with every passing mile. The young boy rested his head against his mother's arm. The siblings whispered quietly to each other. The journalist closed his notebook and looked out the window, letting his thoughts drift with the scenery. The doctor folded his hands in his lap, taking a slow, steady breath. The older man leaned back in his seat, his eyes half closing as though memories stirred gently in his mind. The toy maker rested his hands on his knees, listening to the soft creak of the train as though it were a familiar friend. The night deepened slowly. Lights from small towns flickered briefly as the train passed, then vanished into the quiet shadows. The conductor walked the aisle one more time, ensuring everyone was comfortable. His footsteps were soft, barely audible beneath the steady rhythm of the wheels. As the train continued its journey through the cold Christmas Eve night, there was a peaceful stillness inside each car. No one knew what awaited them farther ahead, but in that moment, wrapped in warmth and the gentle motion of the train, they felt safe, hopeful, and ready for the long path through the winter darkness. The lights inside glowed softly. The windows held faint reflections of faces calm and quiet. And the train, steady and strong, carried its passengers deeper into the night. Unaware that the journey they had begun would soon become a memory none of them would ever forget. The train slid deeper into the countryside, leaving behind the last familiar glow of the city. Outside, the world felt wider and quieter, with long stretches of open land that faded into the soft gray horizon. The passengers, wrapped in the warm interior of the car, didn't notice the small changes that had begun to unfold around them. To them, it was simply a peaceful Christmas Eve night, perfect for resting, thinking, or quietly watching the landscapes drift by. Little snowflakes finally began to fall. First so lightly that they looked like tiny specks of dust floating past the windows. The boy with the wooden horse pressed his face gently to the glass, tracing the shapes of the flakes as they landed and melted. His mother smiled softly at his fascination, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead as the lantern above them glowed warmly against her scarf. In another row, the older man leaned back with his eyes half closed. The soft rhythm of the train had lulled him into a state nearly between waking and dreaming. Each time the wheels met a slight bump on the track, he opened his eyes just enough to see the dark fields passing outside. He had traveled these routes many times in his life, and the quiet landscapes always stirred something calm inside him. This night felt no different, at least for now. The siblings sat quietly near the window, watching the snow grow heavier. The girl held the tin of cookies in her lap, offering one to her brother. He took it with a shy grin, crumbs gathering at the corner of his mouth as they exchanged whispers about the shapes they thought they saw in the snow-covered distance little houses. Animals. Perhaps even angels drifting between the trees. Their imaginations, untouched by the burdens of adulthood, made the night seem magical rather than threatening. The journalist continued to observe the passengers with thoughtful eyes. His notebook rested on his knee, a pencil tucked behind his ear. He wasn't writing at the moment. Instead, he allowed the calm of the evening to settle inside him. He looked out at the fields beyond the glass, watching as the snow began to thicken, softening the edges of the world and turning everything into gentle silhouettes. Occasionally, he studied the faces around him, the quiet mother, the patient conductor, the doctor sitting alone with his steady, contemplative Ghazi. He didn't know their stories, but he sensed that each person carried something meaningful, something the night might reveal in time. The toy maker sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap. He listened to the faint creaks of the train, the muffled wind outside, and the softness of people's voices. He loved these long winter journeys. They reminded him of home. of fireside evenings when he used to carve small wooden toys by lamplight. His wooden box above his head felt strangely comforting, as if the toys resting inside were keeping him company. The conductor walked quietly through the aisle again, moving with a thoughtful calmness. He checked on the elderly woman resting under a wool blanket, asked the young couple if they were warm enough, and gently reminded a few passengers to keep their feet away from the aisle for safety. His voice was low and steady, soothing like a familiar melody played on a cold night. Yet behind his gentle manner, he had noticed something changing outside. At one point he paused near the window, narrowing his eyes slightly as he studied the thickening snow. It fell faster now, swirling in small waves that made it harder to see the track ahead. The wind had picked up too, brushing the sides of the train with a deeper, more persistent sound. Nothing dangerous yet, but enough to make him more alert. He didn't want the passengers to worry, so he quietly adjusted the lanterns and walked toward the front of the car. Meanwhile, the doctor sat still, with his hands folded neatly, his gaze soft but distant. He watched the snow without expression, though something about the deepening weather seemed to touch him quietly. Perhaps he was remembering past winters, past journeys, or moments in his life when he had sat alone with only the sound of a train and the whisper of snow outside. There was no sadness in his face, only a certain depth that came from having seen much of life's challenges. Farther back, a large man with a thick coat tried to start a friendly conversation with the journalist, commenting on how beautiful the snowfall looked. The journalist nodded kindly, agreeing that it was indeed beautiful, though he also mentioned it was unusual for the snow to grow heavy so quickly. The man shrugged, laughing softly, saying that Christmas weather always had surprises. His warm, booming voice carried through the car for a moment before settling into the general murmur of quiet talk. As the train continued, the snow became steady enough that some passengers finally noticed the difference. The view outside turned hazy, the fields vanishing into white shadows. The trees looked like faint drawings sketched against a pale background. A few people glanced at one another with mild curiosity, but no one felt alarmed. Winter storms were not uncommon, and trains in 1906 were built to withstand harsh weather far worse than what they were experiencing at that moment. Still, the conductor made his way toward the engine to speak briefly with the engineer. The passengers didn't hear his soft conversation or see the slight concern in his eyes. They only felt the steady movement of the train beneath them, the warmth of the lanterns, the quiet breaths of people settling deeper into the comfort of the evening. Inside the car, time passed slowly. The mother pulled a blanket around her little boy as he began to grow sleepy, his fingers still holding onto the wooden horse. The siblings shared the last cookie from the tin, giggling softly as the crumbs fell into their laps. The journalist leaned his head back, relaxing into the motion of the train. The older man finally closed his eyes completely, letting his breathing settle evenly. The toy maker adjusted his glasses, then folded his hands again, feeling grateful for a peaceful night. Every few minutes, the train gave a gentle rattle as it passed over a slight shift in the track. The lantern swayed softly, casting slow-moving shadows across the wooden walls. The sound was soothing, like a lullaby created by the rails themselves. Many passengers began to drift towards sleep, eyes half closing, breaths slowing, minds wandering into quiet dreams. Outside, the wind grew stronger, sweeping the snow into larger, swirling patterns. The world beyond the windows looked almost entirely white now, as if wrapped in a soft blanket. The train pushed onward, steady and determined, its engine hissing against the cold. But somewhere deep in the night, hidden behind the peaceful calm, the storm continued to gather strength, quietly, steadily, and without hurry. No one inside the train had any reason to expect what the hours ahead would bring. For now, the night felt safe, wrapped in warmth and softly drifting snow. And the Christmas Eve journey continued forward, 1 mile at a time, deeper into the frozen heart of winter. The snow outside had grown thicker, falling with a steadiness that blurred everything beyond the windows. It was no longer the gentle drift from earlier. The flakes now moved with purpose, sweeping downward and wide. White sheets that softened the outlines of the world until they nearly disappeared. From inside the train, the passengers could see only a faint glow where the lantern light met the swirling snow. Everything else dissolved into a quiet whiteness, as though the train were floating through a cloud. Most of the travelers had settled into a peaceful stillness. The gentle rocking of the train, softened by the snow piling along the tracks, felt even smoother than before. The little boy sleeping beside his mother breathed softly, the wooden horse still resting in his hand. His mother pulled the blanket up to his chin, brushing his hair gently and watching him with the tender calm that only came on long winter journeys. The siblings, seated by the window, had grown quieter. The boy had fallen asleep halfway through a whispered story he had been telling his sister. She rested her head against the cool glass, watching the snow rush past in a blur. The world looked unreal, almost dreamlike. She imagined the snowflakes were tiny stars drifting down from the sky, settling onto the train as it carried everyone through the night. Her eyes grew heavy as she watched them, until eventually her head slipped down onto her brother's shoulder. Farther down the car, the older man remained awake, though his eyes were half closed. He watched the lanterns along the aisle as they flickered with the gentle sway of the train. The soft light made the wooden panels glow warmly, casting deep but soothing shadows across the seats. The rhythm of the wheels was almost hypnotic, tapping out a slow, steady pattern that matched the beating of his heart. He thought about the holidays he had lived through, some joyful, some quiet, like this one. Christmas always brought memories with it, but this year he welcomed the peacefulness. The journalist, who had been writing earlier, had tucked his notebook away and leaned back in his seat. He wasn't asleep, but his thoughts drifted lazily with the movement of the train. He watched the passengers and listened to the soft breathing around him. There was something calming about being surrounded by people he didn't know, yet somehow trusted to share the quiet of the night. The storm outside didn't trouble him, not yet. It was winter, after all. Snowstorms were as much a part of the season as pine trees and candlelight. The doctor sat with his hands resting on the small medical bag beside him. He looked out the window, though there was little to see beyond the swirling white. His expression was unreadable, but there was a stillness about him that suggested he was listening more than watching. He could sense the deepening of the storm, the way the wind pressed against the train in faint but increasing gusts. He wasn't afraid. He had traveled in worse weather, but he felt the subtle change in the air, the quiet tightening of the world outside. The toymaker had grown drowsy, his head nodding gently forward as he tried to stay awake. He always disliked sleeping on trains, afraid that the sudden movement or noise might jolt him awake in confusion. But tonight the motion was so soft, the lantern light so warm, that staying awake felt nearly impossible. His wooden box remained carefully secured above him, the rope knotted tightly. Now and then, he glanced up to be sure it hadn't shifted, then let his eyes close again. Near the front of the car, the conductor stood quietly for a moment before heading to the engine. He had walked through the aisles several times already, checking on passengers, examining windows, making sure the lanterns burned steadily. Nothing seemed wrong from inside, but the snow. The snow concerned him. It wasn't falling anymore, it was pouring, sweeping across the tracks with a density he had not seen earlier in the evening. When he reached the engine, the engineer glanced over his shoulder. His face, illuminated by the dim glow of the instrument panel. He looked focused, both hands on the controls, watching the tracks ahead as best he could through the thick swirl of snow. The conductor stepped closer, speaking quietly so as not to alarm the passengers behind him. Visibility? Poor, the engineer replied softly. The snow's coming faster than expected. Tracks are still clear, but it's getting hard to see more than a few yards ahead. The conductor nodded, keeping his expression calm. We'll take it slow. Passengers are settled. No one seems worried. Good, the engineer said. We'll keep steady for now. If the drift gets too heavy, we may need to slow further, but there's no immediate danger. The conductor stood beside him for a moment, studying the swirling white outside. The storm was beautiful in its own way, wild, soft, and relentless. It looked almost peaceful from within the train, but he knew the world beyond was colder and far less forgiving. Let me know if anything changes, he said gently before turning back toward the passenger car. Inside, a soft hush had taken over. Many passengers slept, curled up in their coats and blankets. The lanterns glowed like small golden moons along the aisle. The steady rumble of the engine mixed with the muted whistle of wind against the windows, creating a quiet lullaby for everyone inside. As the conductor walked down the aisle, he noticed a few passengers stir lightly as he passed. The journalist opened his eyes for a moment, giving a faint nod before drifting back into half-sleep. The siblings shifted slightly, the girl adjusting the blanket over them both. The older man watched the conductor with a soft, knowing expression, though he said nothing. He simply nodded, as though acknowledging the quiet work the conductor did to keep everyone safe. The mother tightened her hold on her sleeping child when the train hit a deeper patch of snow, causing a small but noticeable sway. It wasn't enough to cause concern, but she instinctively held him closer. The conductor noticed and offered a reassuring smile, though she barely saw it with her eyes half closed. Outside, the storm continued to build. The snow fell so thickly that the tracks beneath were beginning to vanish, swallowed by the white. The wind pressed harder against the cars, making a faint, low sound that drifted along the sides of the train like a whisper. The passengers didn't notice the small changes, the slightly slower pace, the longer exhale of the engine, the deeper pitch of the wind. Inside, the warmth and steady rocking lulled them deeper into rest. The storm might have been strengthening, but the cabin still felt like a cocoon of comfort. The journalist opened his eyes again, sensing something different in the rhythm of the train. It wasn't alarming, just slightly heavier, a bit slower. He glanced toward the window, but the world outside was nothing more than white streaks rushing past. He took a slow breath and leaned back again. The snowstorm was part of the journey now, something to accept rather than fear. The conductor took another slow walk through the aisle before settling near the front of the car, keeping a careful watch. His presence was steady, reassuring. Even if most people were asleep and unaware of him, he sat quietly, listening to the storm grow stronger outside the wooden walls. The night deepened. The world outside became a silent, swirling mass of snow and wind. The train pushed on, steady but cautious, carrying its passengers further into the heart of the storm. No one inside yet realized how isolated they were becoming, mile by mile. As the tracks behind them slowly vanished beneath the heavy snow, they felt only peace, warmth, and the endless rhythm of the train as it carried them through the quiet winter night. When the passengers stepped down from the stalled train, the wooden platform of the small rural station creaked beneath their boots. Snow had packed into every crack of the old boards, softening each footstep. The night felt heavier here than inside the train, quieter, colder, and strangely endless. The lamps attached to the station's roof struggled against the wind, their dim halos barely touching the snowy ground. The travelers gathered near the station building, brushing cold flakes from their coats and scarves. Even those who had been calm earlier now felt a quiet worry rising in their chests. The surrounding landscape was silent, buried under layers of untouched snow. No roads were visible, no distant farmhouse lights. Only the tracks stretched into the darkness like thin silver lines disappearing into nowhere. Inside the station, a small waiting room offered a weak but welcome warmth. A single potbelly stove sat in the corner, glowing faintly red. Passengers moved closer to it, holding out chilled hands. The station master, an elderly man with gentle eyes, apologized repeatedly. He had already wired for assistance, but the blizzard had knocked down lines and blocked routes. Help would come, he insisted, but no one could say when. A tiny food counter stood beside the waiting room, run by a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Harper. She looked worried as she took stock of what she had: 4 loaves of bread, a tin of biscuits, a few jars of preserves, and a pot of hot water slowly heating on a stove. It wasn't much, especially for a full train of stranded passengers. Still, she greeted everyone with a soft smile, assuring them she would stretch everything as far as possible. People began settling in. Some found wooden benches, others stood against the walls. A few passengers who had barely spoken to anyone during the journey now exchanged small, tired conversations. A mother traveling with her young son told the others they were headed to Chicago for Christmas. A group of college students shared stories about their winter break plans. An elderly couple described visiting their daughter for the holidays. Each voice made the room feel less like a group of strangers and more like a temporary community brought together by the storm. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows, howling softly as if trying to find a way in. The snow thickened, swirling in the dim light like drifting feathers. Every few minutes, someone peeked out the door, hoping to see lanterns or hear the sound of another engine in the distance. But the night remained empty. Still, the fear that had first gripped the passengers slowly softened. They watched the flames in the stove, listened to the gentle hum of quiet conversation, and felt the first traces of shared comfort. Though the storm raged outside, inside the station there was warmth, a sense of togetherness, and the beginning of trust among people who had never met before. The night was far from over, but something steady had settled over the group, a calmness that whispered they would face the long hours ahead, side by side. As the storm deepened outside, a gentle shift began to unfold inside the station. What had started as quiet worry slowly grew into an atmosphere of kindness. People were cold, tired, and uncertain about the long night ahead. Yet something warm began to rise among them, an instinct to look after one another. Mrs. Harper carried a kettle of warm water around the room, offering a cup to each passenger. Though there was no tea left to brew, the steam alone felt comforting. The travelers accepted it with grateful smiles, letting the warmth soak into their hands. A man named Mr. Doyle, a traveling salesman, stood up and opened his leather suitcase. He took out a few packages of crackers and a small tin of dried fruit. They weren't much, but he placed them on the counter beside Mrs. Harper. "If we all share a little," he said softly, "we'll have enough to make it through the night." His simple gesture sparked something. A young teacher on her way home for the holidays reached into her bag and pulled out 2 apples. A college student contributed a wrapped loaf of sweet bread his mother had given him for the trip. Even a shy teenage girl, who had hardly spoken since the train stopped, placed a small pouch of nuts on the table. There was no rush, no noise, just quiet generosity, like ripples spreading across a calm lake. The station master stepped forward, touched by the sight. His lined face softened as he arranged the food gently. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "You're good people," he said. "Nights like this remind us what it means to look out for each other." He then checked the telegraph machine again, tapping it with careful fingers. It still crackled weakly, struggling against the storm. He assured the group that he would keep trying, even if it took all night. Back in the waiting room, passengers began breaking pieces of bread, passing them hand to hand. No one took more than they needed. Even the children sensed the quiet seriousness of the moment and accepted their small portions with calm gratitude. A man who played the harmonica kept the instrument in his pocket, but hummed a slow, peaceful tune, barely above a whisper. It wasn't music meant to entertain, was meant to soothe, a soft rhythm that filled the room like a blanket laid gently across weary shoulders. Outside, the wind hit the station walls in long, steady breaths. But inside, people sat closer, sharing warmth through simple accent, extra scarf offered to a shivering traveler, a seat given to an elderly woman, a coat draped over a bench for added comfort. The night remained cold and uncertain. Yet the fear that had once lingered felt lighter now. Kindness had taken its place, settling into every corner of the old wooden station. And as the snow continued to fall, the passengers realized they were no longer facing the storm alone. The hours drifted by like slow-moving clouds, and the passengers gradually realized something they had been avoiding. They would have to spend the night inside the station. No help had arrived, and the storm showed no sign of easing. The snow outside pressed against the windows like a thick white curtain, and the wind sang in long, hollow notes that echoed across the empty land. The station master returned from a small storage room with a few worn wool blankets folded carefully in his arms. They were old and thin from years of use, but to the stranded travelers, they felt precious. "There aren't many," he said gently, "but we'll make them stretch." People nodded with quiet gratitude. No one complained. Instead, some offered their coats, scarves, or extra shawls to help those who had none. Slowly, passengers began arranging themselves around the waiting room. The benches became resting places, while others settled onto the floor with whatever padding they could find, rolled up coats, travel bags, or folded blankets. Mrs. Harper placed another log into the small stove, and the fire crackled softly, giving off a warm orange glow. It wasn't enough to heat the whole room, but it created a gentle center of warmth where people naturally gathered. Children sat closest to it, leaning sleepily against their parents. A man who had been traveling alone gave up his bench to an elderly woman, insisting he was fine with sitting on the floor. A pair of brothers offered to switch places with a family so they could be closer to the warmth. These simple acts made the room feel softer, safer. The lights in the station flickered once, dimmed, then steadied again. The electrical lines struggled against the storm, but still held on. The faint yellow glow cast long shadows across the wooden walls, making the room feel like a protected cabin in the middle of an endless winter wilderness. As passengers settled down, some spoke in low voices about their homes, their Christmas plans, and the people waiting for them. Others simply closed their eyes, breathing slowly, letting the quietness of the room ease their worries. The hum of low conversation blended with the soft whistle of the wind, creating a calm, rhythmic sound that felt almost like a lullaby. The teenage girl who had shared her bag of nuts now sat near the stove, speaking shyly with the college students. A father wrapped his coat around his sleeping son, gently smoothing the boy's hair. A woman reading a small book lowered it and offered part of her blanket to the stranger beside her. The station master made one final round, checking windows, doors, and the stove. He wasn't just following duty, he was making sure everyone felt safe. When he finally sat down near the telegraph machine, his voice was barely above a whisper. "This storm won't last forever," he said, mostly to reassure the room. "You're doing just fine." His words drifted warmly into the still air. Outside, the blizzard roared. Inside, there was peace off fragile, shared calm. The passengers slowly settled deeper into their makeshift resting spots. Guided by the soft glow of the stove and the gentle murmur of human togetherness. And though the night would be long, its first quiet hours had begun with warmth, kindness, and the steady belief that morning would eventually come. As midnight approached, a deep quietness settled over the small station. The stove glowed steadily, offering a gentle warmth that spread through the room like a soft blanket. Most passengers had stopped talking, their voices fading into the hush of the winter night. It was the kind of silence that felt peaceful, rather than empty, a silence shaped by shared patience and the slow rhythm of exhaustion. Outside, the storm pressed on. Snow slapped gently against the windows, and the wind moved around the building with long, sweeping breaths. Yet inside, the sounds were quiet and comforting. The faint crackle of burning wood, the slow shifting of someone adjusting a blanket, the distant hum of the telegraph wires vibrating in the cold. In one corner, an older man with a gray mustache sat with his hands folded on his lap. Though he barely spoke earlier, now he whispered to the small group beside him about his childhood winters. He described walking through deep snow to deliver firewood to neighbors. The smell of his mother's warm bread, and the Christmas mornings when he and his brothers woke early just to see frost patterns on the windows. His voice was low and steady, like a memory drifting through the quiet room. Nearby, a young mother held her son close as he slept, his head resting against her shoulder. She looked around the room with calm eyes, then softly told another passenger how her boy had been excited to ride the train for the first time. She admitted that she missed her husband waiting for them in Chicago, but she felt strangely safe here, among strangers who had become companions through the storm. A group of college students sat with their backs against the wall, sharing gentle stories of their campus life. Instead of loud laughter, their voices were soft, almost reflective. They spoke about little things, snowball fights on winter mornings, the sound of footsteps on frozen sidewalks, the feeling of going home for the holidays after months away. Across the room, the teenage girl who had been shy earlier listened quietly to an elderly woman speaking softly about her daughter. She talked about how proud she was of her family, how quickly life seemed to move, and how grateful she felt that everyone here had been so kind. The girl nodded, offering a small but sincere smile. Even the station master, who usually kept to himself, shared a few words. Sitting near the telegraph machine, he told a couple of passengers how the station had once been a busy stop decades ago. He remembered the days when travelers filled the platform, carrying heavy bags and laughing loudly as they hurried through the doors. His eyes softened as he spoke, not with sadness, but with fondness for the memories. These stories drifted through the room like warm currents. None were dramatic. None were meant to impress. They were simple, almost ordinary, yet comforting reminders that each person carried a life full of quiet moments, hopes, and memories. One by one, the passengers sank deeper into their resting places. Some closed their eyes, listening to the murmur of fading conversations. Others watched the shadows flicker on the wooden walls, feeling calm for the first time since the train had stopped. Outside, the blizzard continued its fierce dance, but inside, time slowed. The stories, whispered softly, blended into the quiet night, creating a cocoon of peace around everyone present. And though sleep did not come easily for all, the shared memories made the long winter night feel a little gentler, a reminder that even in the coldest moments, human warmth could fill a room. The night grew colder, and the wind outside rose into a fierce, rushing sound that circled the station like a restless spirit. Snowflakes hurled themselves against the windows, sticking for a moment before sliding down the cold glass. The storm seemed determined to remind the passengers of its strength, howling through narrow gaps and around the edges of the wooden roof. Yet, inside the station, calmness settled deeper than before. Most passengers were lying down or leaning back against the walls, wrapped in blankets and coats. Some had drifted into light sleep, breathing slowly, while others remained awake, watching the stove's soft glow flicker like tiny waves of gold. The crackling of burning wood mixed gently with the steady hum of the wind, creating a rhythm that felt strangely soothing. A man near the far bench stirred awake when the building shook slightly from a heavy gust. He blinked, looked around, and then relaxed again when he saw others still resting peacefully. His heartbeat slowed. It was easier to be brave when you weren't alone. A young mother gently adjusted her son's blanket after he shifted in his sleep. The boy murmured something and snuggled closer to her. She brushed a hand over his forehead, grateful for the warmth in his small body. The storm may have trapped them, but at least they were safe here, safe and together. Across the room, two brothers whispered quietly, their voices barely above a breath. They weren't afraid, just restless. The older one reassured the younger, telling him that trains were strong, tracks were strong, and storms always passed, even the worst ones. The younger brother believed him, because in this quiet room filled with tired faces, reassurance felt as real as the snow falling outside. The station master rose from his chair near the telegraph machine and walked slowly around the room. He checked each window, pressing his palm to the cold glass. Everything held firm. He tightened the latch on the main door and placed a small towel at the bottom to block the draft. He didn't say much, but his presence, steady and calm, made everyone feel protected. He stopped by the stove, added another small piece of wood, and watched the sparks rise. The glow brightened slightly, pushing back the shadows along the floor. For a moment, he closed his eyes, letting the warmth touch his tired face. Even those who couldn't sleep found comfort in the room's quiet. A woman sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap, watching the snow swirl outside. The night felt endless, but she reminded herself that storms had limits even when they felt infinite. She breathed slowly, matching her breath with the soft crackle of the fire. Every now and then, the building would tremble gently as the wind swept past, but no one panicked. People simply opened their eyes, looked around, saw familiar faces resting peacefully, and closed their eyes again. The presence of others gave them strength, shared strength. Though the storm outside raged louder, it almost faded into the background inside the station. The room felt like a quiet island in the middle of a frozen sea. Despite the cold, despite the uncertainty, the passengers found a strange comfort in the shared stillness. The night was far from over, but the peacefulness inside the room grew thicker, calmer, like a warm breath spreading slowly from one corner to another. And as the blizzard cried against the windows, the stranded travelers held on to one simple truth. They were not facing the storm alone. The long winter night continued its slow march, and the storm still circled the station with steady strength. Most passengers remained wrapped in blankets, some sleeping lightly, others resting with their eyes half open. The quietness inside had grown deep and steady, like a calm tide. Then, sometime in the late hours, no one quite knew when it happened, a faint sound drifted through the wind. It was soft at first, barely noticeable, almost like the distant crack of ice shifting. A few passengers stirred, not sure whether they had imagined it. The teenage girl opened her eyes and looked around. An older man lifted his head slightly, listening. The sound came again, a low, distant hum, like something moving far away through the frozen landscape. No one spoke loudly, they simply listened. The storm still pushed against the building, but now a different tone blended with it, a steady rhythm, faint but unmistakable. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong to the wind or the snow. The station master, who had been dozing lightly in his chair near the telegraph, sat up slowly. He listened carefully, his eyes narrowing with gentle concentration. After a moment, he stood and walked quietly to the frosted window. He wiped a small circle in the condensation and peered into the swirling darkness outside. The passengers watched him, their breaths held, but no one asked anything. They didn't want to break whatever moment was forming. For a long while, all he could see was the storm-white spirals dancing in the glow of the station lights. But then, far in the distance, barely visible through the thick snow, a flicker of light appeared. It was faint, like a tiny spark moving against the darkness. The station master leaned closer. He wasn't sure storms could play tricks on the eyes, but the light pulsed again, steady and slow. He didn't smile, but his expression softened. He stepped away from the window and spoke in a calm, low voice, so as not to alarm or excite anyone. "It could be help," he said gently, "or it may just be reflections from the snow, but it's worth keeping an eye on." His cautious words spread through the room like a warm breeze. Not excitement, just a soft sense of hope. Something to hold on to during the long, frozen hours. A mother resting with her child pulled the blanket closer, her eyes warming. The brothers who had been whispering earlier leaned forward a little. Even those nearly asleep seemed to relax further, as if the possibility of help made their rest easier. No one moved suddenly. No one panicked. The feeling in the room remained slow, quiet, and calm. But there was now a gentle spark, small, distant, and comforting. Passengers settled again into their places, breathing easier. The storm outside still roared, but the idea that someone might be trying to reach them made the night feel a little shorter, a little lighter. The station master kept his position near the window, watching the dim flicker beyond the snow. He didn't expect anything soon, but he stayed alert, steady, and reassuring. Inside, the room felt warmer somehow, because of the stove, but because hope had quietly entered the building, taking a place among the weary travelers. And as the night stretched on, the stranded passengers rested with calmer hearts, knowing that somewhere in the frozen darkness, help might be making its way toward them. The station had grown almost completely silent again. But there was a subtle difference. Even in the soft, low murmur of occasional whispers, the passengers felt a new sense of ease. The faint flicker of light in the distance, whether imagined or real, had entered their hearts as a quiet reassurance. They were still trapped by the storm, still in the frozen wilderness, but they no longer felt quite alone. A small group of travelers began speaking softly, their words gentle enough to blend into the hush of the night. The older man with the gray mustache shared more of his childhood memories, tales of snow-covered villages, nights spent by a crackling fire, and simple Christmas meals with neighbors. His voice was low, steady, and comforting. Listening to him, the others felt a curious mix of nostalgia and calm, as if they had traveled back in time to a world where warmth could be found in stories as much as in blankets. Nearby, the teenage girl finally found her voice. She told a simple story of her own about walking home through a gentle snowstorm in her hometown, the sound of her boots crunching over icy streets, and the glow of lanterns reflecting on frosty windows. She spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully. And even those who had not spoken before leaned closer to listen, drawn in by her quiet honesty. The mother beside her sleeping son murmured something about past Christmas mornings, when she had decorated the tree with her husband and laughed at the boy's small, excited hands. The father nodded, listening with a faint smile while the boy stirred slightly in his sleep, unconsciously reaching for the warmth of the blanket. Even the young college students, who had been restless earlier, relaxed. They shared soft laughter over minor childhood memories, whispering them just loud enough for the nearest neighbors to catch the words. Nothing was loud, nothing rushed. The stories, laughter, and memories moved slowly, like droplets of water spreading across calm ice. The stove's glow flickered gently, casting soft shadows that danced lightly across the room. Each flicker of light seemed to keep the shadows at bay, making the wooden walls feel welcoming and protective. The occasional crackle of burning wood blended with the muted sound of the wind outside, creating a rhythm that almost seemed like a lullaby. The station master moved quietly through the room one last time, checking the doors and windows with care. He smiled faintly at the passengers, who now rested more comfortably in their positions. Others leaned against benches, pillows, or bundled coats. A soft, collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the group. A shared acknowledgement of the small comforts they had found in each other's presence. The storm outside continued its steady pounding, but it no longer felt overwhelming. The passengers had grown accustomed to its sound, its rhythm, and had begun to see it as part of the night's natural landscape rather than a threat. The snow swirled in a steady pattern, muffling the world and creating a sort of protective cocoon around the small station. In these early hours of the long night, humans and nature existed together in quiet harmony. The travelers were no longer strangers. They had become a temporary family, bound not by blood but by shared experience and mutual care. Even as their bodies grew tired and their eyes closed, their hearts carried the warmth of small kindnesses, soft stories, and the faint, distant promise of help. One by one, breathing slowed, eyelids drooped, and the soft rhythm of rest began to take over. The whispers faded, replaced by the calm, gentle hum of a station full of people quietly resting amidst the winter storm. Outside, the snow continued its delicate, unending dance. And inside, the room glowed softly with warmth, care, and the deep peace of a night that had, for a moment, become timeless. And so, the first true hours of rest arrived, wrapping the stranded travelers in a gentle embrace. As the frozen world outside whispered on, endlessly patient, endlessly white, hours passed quietly, and the storm outside gradually softened, though the snow continued to fall steadily. Inside the small station, most passengers had surrendered to sleep. The warm blankets, the gentle flicker of the stove, and the soft hum of wind and occasional whispers had created a cocoon of calm that seemed to hold time itself still. The teenage girl, who had shared her story the night before, now rested with her head leaning lightly against a folded coat. Her soft breathing blended into the quiet rhythm of the room. Nearby, the young mother gently adjusted the blanket over her sleeping son, who had now drifted fully into dreams of snow and bright holiday mornings. Some travelers, however, remained awake. They didn't move much, simply listening to the soft sounds around them, the slow crackle of the stove, the distant whistle of the wind against the wooden roof, the faint shuffle of someone shifting to get more comfortable. Every sound, once alarming, now felt natural, even comforting. The station master walked through the room, his steps quiet but deliberate. He paused at the windows, noting the snow's gentle swirl outside. The tracks were buried beneath a thick layer of white, and the world seemed to exist solely as the station, the passengers, and the quiet night surrounding them. A few passengers sat quietly, leaning against benches or resting on the floor, eyes half closed as they waited for the first signs of morning. The flickering stove light cast gentle shadows on the walls, creating patterns that moved softly as the flames licked the small pieces of wood. These subtle movements gave the night a peaceful rhythm, steady and slow, perfect for the drowsy minds of those inside. A faint sound drifted from the distance, a low, rolling echo that could have been another train, or simply the wind shifting through the snow-laden trees. It stirred a few people from sleep. They looked toward the window, alert but calm, recognizing it not as danger but as a signal that the world outside was still alive, still moving, even in its quiet, frozen state. Even as the night deepened and the cold pressed lightly against the wooden walls, the room inside remained soft, protected, and full of quiet life. The hum of shared warmth and gentle human presence wrapped the passengers in a sense of security that neither the snow nor the wind could penetrate. In the silence, dreams began to weave through the minds of the sleeping. Memories, hopes, and small imaginings filled the room alongside the occasional rustle of shifting blankets. Even those who remained awake felt it, the subtle, calming presence of the night, carrying them forward toward the first light of morning. And so, the station held its breath, cradling the travelers through the dark hours, preparing them for the slow, gentle arrival of dawn, a promise that, despite the long night and the storm outside, a new day would eventually arrive. As the night slowly gave way to morning, a subtle change crept into the small station. The darkness began to soften, replaced by a faint, cool blue light that filtered through the frost-covered windows. The storm outside had eased slightly, though the snow still blanketed the tracks in a thick, silent layer. The world beyond the station seemed calm, fragile, and almost magical in the early hours. Inside, most passengers stirred gently. Eyes blinked open, stretching bodies lightly under heavy blankets. The warmth from the stove mixed with the crisp, cool light creeping in from outside, creating a balance that was neither harsh nor uncomfortable. It was the kind of light that whispered of a new day without demanding attention, allowing each person to wake slowly and peacefully. The teenage girl rubbed her eyes and looked around, noticing her companions still nestled in quiet rest. She gave a soft smile, careful not to disturb the calm. Nearby, the young mother adjusted her son's blanket, brushing his hair back gently as he murmured something in his sleep. She let him rest a little longer, savoring the peacefulness of the moment. The older man with the gray mustache stood slowly, leaning on his cane as he stretched. The calm of the night had eased into a gentle alertness. He walked toward the window, peering out at the snow-covered tracks, noticing the soft light reflecting off the white surface. For the first time in hours, the outside world didn't feel threatening. It felt quiet, serene, and full of possibilities. Even those who had been awake throughout the night felt a change. The wind's howl had softened into a gentle whisper, and the snowflakes now moved with a slow, lazy grace. The station master adjusted the stove one last time, watching the flames flicker. knowing the warmth would help the passengers gradually transition from night to morning. Soft whispers began to emerge as people shared their first thoughts of the day. The college students spoke quietly about breakfast, the elderly couple about the roads they would follow once the storm had cleared. Everyone kept their voices low, as though the station itself demanded respect for the delicate, slow arrival of morning. The stove glowed gently, and shadows danced across the walls in soft patterns. For a moment, all worries of the night, the uncertainty, the storm, the long hours seemed distant. What remained was a quiet hope, subtle and warm, wrapped around each traveler as naturally as the blankets that covered them. Some passengers stretched, moving carefully to avoid disturbing others. Small acts of preparation, adjusting a coat, tying a scarf, checking the contents of a bag became part of the soft rhythm of the early hours. Each motion was deliberate, slow, and gentle, as if the very pace of the morning demanded patience. Outside, the snow reflected the faint blue light of dawn, casting a soft glow through the station's windows. The tracks, still hidden beneath the blanket of white, hinted at the journey yet to come. Inside, the travelers, cocooned in warmth and shared quiet, felt ready to greet the new day slowly, safely, and together. And so, the station held its gentle breath, waiting with its passengers for the storm to fully pass, for the sun to rise, and for the long, frozen night to dissolve into a calm, peaceful morning. The dawn crept gently over the snow-covered landscape, and the first clear rays of light filtered into the station, soft and delicate. The frost clinging to the windows sparkled faintly, reflecting the subtle blue and pink hues of early morning. The storm had weakened considerably, leaving only the quiet whisper of wind across the frozen fields. Inside, the passengers stirred more noticeably, eyes opened fully, and shoulders stretched as bodies shook off the stiffness of a long night. The stove still glowed warmly, casting long, slow-moving shadows across the wooden floor. Its heat blended with the fresh, cool light from outside, forming a gentle balance that made the room feel alive yet still peaceful. The older man with the gray mustache leaned against a bench and took a deep breath. He looked toward the distant tracks, now faintly visible under the soft snow. For the first time, he saw a path that seemed passable as subtle, quiet promise that the journey would continue. The teenage girl moved to the stove, warming her hands slowly and feeling the comforting glow soak into her chilled fingers. She looked around the room, noticing others slowly waking as well. There was a quiet understanding in the air, a shared awareness that the long night had been survived together. A soft murmur of conversation began to rise as people tentatively spoke to each other. The young mother whispered to her son, now fully awake, about the snow outside and the promise of breakfast. A few college students exchanged quiet jokes about the long night, drawing soft smiles from those nearby. Even the station master allowed himself a small smile as he moved gently among the passengers, checking windows and making sure everyone felt ready for the day. Outside, the snow glistened with the delicate hues of morning, and the wind no longer roared but moved with a calm, steady rhythm. The tracks, faintly visible through the snow, hinted at the journey ahead. Even though they could not yet move, the travelers felt the first sparks of hope that their journey would continue, and that they would eventually reach home. The room felt serene. Passengers adjusted blankets, sipped on small cups of warm water, and stretched slowly. The stove crackled softly, its light flickering in rhythm with the subtle movements of people beginning to prepare themselves. Every action was deliberate, slow, and unhurried, like the world itself had agreed to let them wake gently. Even the children, who had been restless during the long night, now found comfort in the soft light and gentle warmth. Their small faces reflected the calm around them, and their breathing settled into a smooth, rhythmic pattern. In these early hours, the station felt like more than a shelter. It was a sanctuary, a place where human kindness, patience, and endurance had come together to create peace amidst a frozen wilderness. Though the snow still lay heavy outside, the first rays of hope had entered the room, soft and unobtrusive, promising that the long, cold night was finally giving way to a new day. And as the travelers prepared to greet the morning, there was a quiet understanding that, despite the storm and the frozen landscape, they had survived together, and that the journey ahead, though uncertain, could now begin with gentle confidence. The soft glow of morning had filled the station with a gentle calm. The snow outside reflected the pale light, giving everything a soft, muted clarity. Inside, the passengers began to stir, slowly stretching limbs and blinking against the faint, diffused light. The long night had ended, and with it, the tension and fear that had clung to every heart. The stove, still glowing warmly, became the center of movement. Mrs. Harper quietly began to prepare a small breakfast with the limited supplies she had. A few slices of bread toasted over the flame, some hot water warmed for tea, and what little preserves remained. Each action was slow and careful, respecting the room's fragile calm. Passengers rose from their resting places, smoothing blankets and folding coats. The older man with the gray mustache helped the young mother adjust her child's shawl, making sure it was snug and warm. Nearby, a pair of college students tidied up their small area, moving their bags and coats to create space for others. Every gesture was quiet, considerate, as if they had all learned a silent lesson from the long, shared night. A subtle murmur of conversation rose as people greeted each other in soft tones. They spoke of the night's strange peace, shared memories, and the storm that had brought them together. Each voice was calm, deliberate, and measured. There was no rush, no loud laughter, just gentle, unhurried human connection. The teenage girl, now fully awake, walked to the window and brushed away some frost, peering at the tracks that had been hidden under thick snow. They were visible now, faint lines stretching into the distance. She turned and offered a quiet smile to the station master, who nodded in acknowledgement. The first glimmers of hope had taken shape, subtle but unmistakable. Children stirred as the warm bread and tea filled the room with its simple, comforting scent. Small hands reached for the food carefully, guided by parents who ensured everyone had their share. Even in such modest fare, there was satisfaction, a reminder of humanity's quiet ability to care for one another. The wind outside had softened into a gentle whisper, brushing the snow lightly across the fields. The tracks, visible but still partially covered, promised the possibility of movement, though the passengers knew it would be slow. They didn't mind. After the long night, each step, each action, was taken deliberately, with patience and gratitude. The station felt alive yet calm. Every small gesture, passing a blanket, helping with a bag, Sharing food wove an unspoken bond among the travelers. The room's quiet warmth combined with the morning light created a sensation of gentle awakening, both physical and emotional. As the travelers prepared themselves, adjusting clothing and gathering what they needed for the journey ahead, the soft rhythm of the station created a sense of security. The storm, though it had raged fiercely through the night, now seemed distant, almost protective in its lingering quiet. And so, with the first rays of morning spilling softly through the windows, the stranded passengers moved slowly but steadily toward the new day. Calm, rested, and united, they were ready to face whatever the snowy landscape outside might bring. The soft morning light had filled the station with a gentle glow, and the passengers began to gather near the frosted windows. Their eyes, still heavy with sleep, scanned the world outside, a landscape transformed by the storm. Everything was covered in a thick, unbroken layer of snow, shimmering faintly under the pale sun. The tracks, partially visible beneath the white, stretched into the distance, silent and still. The station master quietly opened the main door, allowing a small rush of cold, crisp air to mix with the warmth from the stove. The sudden chill made a few travelers shiver, but it was not unpleasant. It was the clean, refreshing kind of cold that signaled a new beginning. The teenage girl pressed her hand lightly against the frosted glass, marveling at the untouched snow. It lay smooth and soft, sparkling like tiny diamonds. She whispered softly to herself, a small expression of awe at the serene beauty of the world after the storm. An older man, leaning on his cane, stepped closer to the doorway, carefully feeling the ground outside with one cautious foot. The snow crunched softly beneath him, breaking the long silence of the frozen landscape. He smiled faintly, as if testing the world beyond the station for the first time in hours. The young mother lifted her child, wrapping him carefully in a warm coat, and peered out at the snow-covered fields. She spoke quietly, pointing toward the distant tracks. "It's calm now," she said. "I think we can move soon." Her voice carried a soft confidence, calming the children nearby who had begun to stir in anticipation. Even the station master took a moment to step outside, brushing snowflakes from his coat. He scanned the horizon, noting the subtle shifts in the snow and the tracks below. Though the journey ahead would still be slow, the storm had passed enough for them to see a path forward. The travelers, one by one, moved to the doorway or the windows, letting the morning light touch their faces. The soft glow made the snow sparkle, each flake reflecting the subtle pink and blue of the early sky. The silence outside was profound, only broken by the occasional creak of ice and the soft rustle of wind over snowdrifts. Inside, the warmth of the stove remained, mingling with the crisp light from outside. People lingered a little longer, savoring the quiet moments, understanding that the night's long ordeal had given way to a calm morning. No one rushed. There was no urgency, only gentle curiosity and cautious optimism. Children leaned against their parents, pointing at small tracks left by birds or the patterns of snowflakes clinging to the wood of the station. The college students whispered to one another about the beauty of the scene, while older passengers simply breathed in the fresh air, feeling alive again after the long, frozen night. The snow stretched endlessly beyond the station, silent and inviting. For the first time, The stranded travelers saw not only the storm that had trapped them, but also the calm and opportunity that followed it. They understood that while the night had tested their patience and endurance, the morning brought the possibility of movement, of warmth, and of reunion with the paths and homes they longed to reach. And so, standing at the threshold of the station, wrapped in blankets and in shared warmth, the passengers quietly embraced the first light of day, a day that promised continuation, hope, and the slow, gentle unfolding of their journey. The station door opened slowly, and a wave of crisp, cold air brushed over the passengers. They stepped carefully onto the snow-covered platform, each foot sinking softly into the thick, powdery blanket that covered the ground. The early morning light reflected off the snow, casting a gentle glow that made every surface sparkle faintly. The first step was always tentative. Travelers moved slowly, testing the frozen ground, feeling the resistance of the snow beneath their boots. Each careful movement was accompanied by the quiet crunch of frost underfoot, a soothing sound that seemed to blend with the soft whispers of wind in the trees and the distant hum of the morning. The teenage girl took her mother's hand, guiding her across the platform. Her eyes shone with cautious excitement, and she paused often to look at the untouched snow and delicate frost patterns that glittered in the dawn. The small beauty of the world after the storm made every step feel like a discovery. The older man, relying on his cane, was careful with each movement, his long coat brushing against the snow. A younger college student stayed close, offering support whenever he wavered, and quietly encouraging him with calm, reassuring words. Every act of care was small but meaningful, binding the travelers together in the fragile new day. The young mother held her child close, making sure the boy's feet were safe from slipping. He giggled softly, feeling the strange crunch of snow beneath his tiny boots. The warmth of family, combined with the quiet beauty of the morning, gave her a gentle smile. She breathed deeply, savoring the fresh air and the safety that the station and its small community had provided throughout the long night. The station master walked a few steps ahead, surveying the tracks and the surrounding snow-covered fields. He pointed out the most stable paths and suggested slow, careful movements. His calm presence reassured the passengers, letting them know that even in the frozen landscape, there was a path forward. The snow underfoot muffled the world beyond the station, making each footstep seem intimate, almost sacred. Birds, rare in the deep winter, occasionally left delicate tracks in the soft snow, which the children observed with curiosity. The soft crunch of boots, the whisper of coats brushing snow, and the faint laughter of small voices created a rhythm that was gentle, deliberate, and calming. No one rushed. Each person moved with patience, allowing the morning to guide them, even in the silent vastness of the snowy landscape. They felt connected not just to one another, but to the frozen world around them. Every careful step was a reminder that they had survived the night, endured the storm, and could now embrace the quiet promise of a new day. And as they began to navigate the first few yards beyond the station, the travelers understood the profound simplicity of this moment. They had faced the frozen darkness together. And now, with the soft dawn light illuminating the snow, each step forward felt like a small victoria, slow, peaceful assertion of life, hope, and endurance. The travelers left the safety of the station one by one, stepping carefully onto the snow-laden tracks that stretched into the distance. Each footfall made a soft, satisfying crunch in the crisp, white powder, a gentle reminder of the frozen world they were crossing. The early morning sun, pale and diffused, cast a faint glow over the landscape, turning the snow into a sparkling, almost magical carpet. The teenage girl walked alongside her mother and younger brother, her steps measured and deliberate. She pointed occasionally to a cluster of icicles hanging from a fence or the delicate frost patterns on nearby shrubs. Her voice was soft, filled with quiet awe, and her family listened closely, appreciating the small wonders of the winter morning. The older man with the gray mustache moved slowly but steadily along the tracks, leaning lightly on his cane. A college student stayed close, offering a steady arm whenever the older man's footing seemed unsure. Their movements were deliberate, careful, and coordinated. A silent agreement to protect and support one another through the frozen expanse. Children trailed along, their small boots making tiny imprints in the snow. They laughed quietly when a snowflake landed on their noses, or when they discovered faint tracks of birds or small animals. The young mother followed closely, ensuring safety while smiling at their innocent delight. The station master walked ahead, occasionally pausing to point out safer paths where the snow was less deep or the ice less slippery. His calm, steady guidance reassured the travelers, lending them confidence as they ventured farther from the warmth of the station. Small stories were whispered along the way, memories of past winters, gentle jokes, and reflections on the night they had endured together. The soft sound of human voices blended with the quiet crunch of boots, creating a rhythm that was soothing and slow. Laughter was rare, but soft, delicate, and perfectly timed, adding warmth to the otherwise cold surroundings. The snow around them was pristine and undisturbed, except for the tracks they left behind. Each step forward felt symbolic proof that despite the frozen night and the storm that had held them captive, they could move forward step by careful step. Even as their bodies adjusted to the cold, there was a lingering warmth from the station's stove and the shared camaraderie. It reminded them of the night spent in waiting, storytelling, and quiet togetherness, a reminder that their strength came not only from themselves, but from each other. The frozen landscape seemed to stretch endlessly, yet the travelers did not feel lost. Instead, each step brought them closer to the hope of reaching home or the next safe place. And each small act of care, helping someone over a patch of ice, sharing a warm glove, offering a reassuring smile, made the journey feel lighter and more manageable. And so, slowly, deliberately, with eyes alert but hearts calm, the stranded travelers moved along the snow-covered tracks. The long, frozen night was behind them, and the soft light of a new day guided them forward, a day full of quiet hope, gentle discovery, and the steadfast promise of togetherness. The snow-covered tracks stretched farther than the eye could see, and the travelers moved along them cautiously. Each step demanded attention, as patches of ice hid beneath soft, powdery snow. The gentle crunch of boots on firmer snow alternated with the careful, almost hesitant tread over slippery areas. It was slow work, but necessary for safety. The teenage girl paused to lift her brother's hand over a particularly deep drift. He giggled softly, excited by the challenge, while she smiled and encouraged him, careful not to rush. Every small success, the safe crossing, of a slippery patch. The careful navigation of a drift felt like a victory, no matter how simple. The older man with the gray mustache leaned slightly on his cane, but each careful step was guided by the steady presence of the college student who walked beside him. Occasionally a whispered word of caution or encouragement passed between them, quiet enough to blend with the soft hush of the morning snow. The young mother kept a close eye on her child, lifting him gently over patches of snow too deep for his small legs. His laughter, soft and bright, broke the stillness of the frozen landscape just enough to remind everyone of the warmth that persisted even in the cold. The station master led the way, identifying the safest routes along the tracks. Occasionally, he pointed out a hidden patch of ice or suggested a more stable path across the snow-covered ground. His calm, unhurried demeanor inspired confidence, and every traveler felt reassured by his experience and presence. Soft murmurs of conversation floated through the group as they moved. Stories of previous winters, reflections on the storm they had survived, and quiet jokes kept spirits steady. Even in the cold, the shared human presence warmed them more than the stove ever could. The snow around them remained pristine, except for the tracks they left behind. Each footprint was a gentle reminder of perseverance, patience, and teamwork. The frozen world seemed vast and unyielding, yet it was navigable when approached carefully, step by step, together. Children pointed out tracks left by birds or other small creatures, sharing their observations with whispers of excitement. The older passengers smiled quietly, appreciating the small joys that broke the monotony of the snowy landscape. The journey was slow, deliberate, and filled with small moments of connection and shared wonder. Even as minor challenges arose, the occasional slippery patch or unexpected drift, the travelers adapted patiently. Hands were offered, arms steadied, and gentle guidance provided. Each small act of help strengthened their bond, reminding them that the long night and the storm had forged more than endurance. It had created trust and quiet companionship. And so, step by careful step, the stranded travelers pressed forward along the snow-covered tracks. The frozen landscape stretched on, vast yet serene, while the soft light of morning and the warmth of shared humanity guided their way. Though the journey remained slow and deliberate, the travelers moved with calm confidence, embracing both the challenges and the quiet beauty of their winter path. As the travelers continued along the snow-covered tracks, a faint glimmer caught the teenage girl's eye. She paused for a moment, squinting against the soft morning light, and pointed quietly toward the horizon. "Look, over there," she whispered, almost afraid to break the delicate calm of the morning. The group followed her gaze. Far in the distance, a subtle glow shimmered through the lingering snow haze. It wasn't the sun, its light was pale and muted, but it moved slightly, like a lantern swaying gently in the wind. The older man with the gray mustache leaned on his cane, adjusting his position to see better. His eyes, sharpened by years of experience, scanned the faint outline of what appeared to be a small building or structure, though the details were obscured by snow and distance. The presence of anything visible at all brought a quiet thrill to the weary travelers. The young mother lifted her child higher on her hip so he could see the distant glow. His eyes widened in amazement, and he whispered excitedly, "Is that a house?" She smiled softly, reassuring him, while feeling a surge of cautious hope herself. Even the station master, usually calm and measured, allowed a faint nod of recognition. The glow could mean safety, warmth, and perhaps assistance after the long, frozen night. It was distant, yes, but its presence was enough to steady hearts and quicken spirits without disturbing the slow, gentle pace of the morning. The travelers shared quiet, deliberate glances. No one spoke loudly, words were unnecessary. The mere sight of a possible destination provided motivation, a gentle push forward in a world that had seemed endless and white for so many hours. They moved toward it slowly, every step careful over the snow, mindful of icy patches and uneven ground. The crunch of boots on snow, the occasional whisper, and the soft murmur of the wind became part of a delicate rhythm. Each movement was measured, deliberate, and imbued with the quiet optimism that only such a long and shared struggle could bring. The light, still distant, grew subtly brighter with every step, reflecting faintly on the snow-covered tracks. For the travelers, it was more than illumination. It was a sign that the night had truly passed, that the long storm was behind them, and that something familiar, safe, and welcoming awaited. Children pointed toward the glow with wonder, their small voices soft but eager. Parents smiled quietly, exchanging glances that spoke of shared relief and hope. The older man adjusted his grip on his cane, steadying himself as he took each careful step. Even amidst the cold and lingering snow, a new warmth had entered their hearts. It wasn't the stove or the blankets that gave them comfort. Knit was the quiet promise of something beyond the frozen fields. Safety, rest, and perhaps a place to regain full strength. And so, step by slow, deliberate step, the travelers pressed forward toward the distant, shimmering light. It was faint, subtle, and fragile. Yet it carried a quiet certainty that even after the longest night, the smallest glimmer could guide the way toward warmth, safety, and the continuation of their journey. The glow in the distance gradually grew brighter as the travelers continued along the snow-covered tracks. Every careful step brought them closer, revealing more of the shapes hidden beneath the morning haze. Slowly, outlines of a small wooden station emerged, partially covered in snow, with smoke rising faintly from a chimney. The teenage girl's eyes widened. It's a station, she whispered softly, as if speaking louder might shatter the delicate calm of the morning. The older man with the gray mustache nodded, leaning lightly on his cane. Finally, he said, his voice low but steady, a place to rest and warm up. The young mother adjusted her child in her arms, letting him peek over her shoulder. His eyes reflected a mix of excitement and relief. "Will there be people there?" he asked softly. She smiled, reassuring him with a gentle nod, though her own heart had begun to lift at the sight of the chimney smoke curling into the clear morning sky. The station master led the way carefully, scanning the ground and ensuring that each step was safe. The snow was still thick in places, but the path toward the station had become more visible, as if the world itself wanted to guide them forward. As they approached, the warmth of the distant fire seemed almost tangible. The soft light spilling from the windows created long, comforting shadows across the snow. Every small detail, the smoke from the chimney, the flicker of light behind frosted panes, the slight movement within signaled human presence, and the promise of help. Even the college students, who had moved quietly all morning, began to exchange soft smiles and whispered words of excitement. The long night, the frozen tracks, the careful steps, they were about to find safety at last. Children ran slightly ahead, careful but eager, their laughter quiet and restrained. Parents followed, supporting and guiding them with gentle hands. The older travelers moved slowly, deliberate, yet their spirits lifted with every step closer to the warm station. The snow around the station was undisturbed, pristine, except for the faint marks of their journey. It reflected the morning sun with a soft brilliance, creating a serene scene that spoke of calm, safety, and a temporary haven after a long ordeal. Inside the travelers, hearts beat with quiet relief. The night's endurance had tested them, but this moment standing on the brink of warmth, rest, and human presence felt like a triumph. The long storm had passed, and though the path had been slow and cautious, they had arrived safely, together, and so, huddled around the stove, wrapped in blankets and the gentle reassurance of each other's company, the stranded travelers slowly regained strength. The long night was behind them, the storm had passed, and the first taste of warmth and nourishment brought with it the simple, profound joy of survival, comfort, and togetherness. As the travelers settled near the stove, a sense of calm and camaraderie began to grow. The warmth of the fire radiated through the room, wrapping everyone in a gentle embrace. Small mugs of tea were held in tired hands, and the quiet murmur of conversation filled the space. A college student spoke first, recounting a humorous moment from the night how a child had sneezed unexpectedly, startling everyone, and then laughed at the commotion. The others chuckled softly, the sound blending with the crackle of the fire and the faint whistle of the wind outside. The older man with the gray mustache shared his memories of winters past, describing the quiet beauty of snow-covered landscapes and the patience required to navigate them. His words carried a soft rhythm, almost like a lullaby, and the younger travelers listened attentively, captivated by the calm authority in his voice. The teenage girl leaned closer to her mother, whispering about the patterns of frost she had seen on the windows that morning. The mother smiled, encouraging curiosity, and the small boy repeated his own observations, delighted by the attention he received. In these exchanges, a quiet connection formed, a shared understanding that even small experiences mattered when survival and comfort were at stake. The station attendant, moving quietly among the group, offered gentle words of encouragement. "You've all done well," he said softly. "The storm has passed, and now you can rest. Share stories, laugh a little, and regain your strength." His presence reminded the travelers that they were not alone and that human kindness was still abundant. Even after such a long, harsh night, the fire flickered, casting dancing shadows across the wooden walls. Each person found a comfortable spot, sipping tea and nibbling at small morsels of bread. Conversations ebbed and flowed, alternating between laughter, thoughtful silence, and whispered anecdotes from the night. Every story, every shared memory, built trust and strengthened bonds. Even the children, who had been restless and tired, now leaned comfortably against their parents or sat quietly near the warmth of the stove, Their small gestures and whispered comments contributed to the gentle rhythm of the room, reinforcing a sense of community. The long night and frozen journey had created more than endurance. It had nurtured empathy, patience, and an understanding of one another's struggles. As each traveler shared their experiences, they found reassurance and comfort in knowing that their fears, hopes, and joys were acknowledged by others who had faced the same harsh conditions. Outside, the morning snow shimmered softly in the pale sunlight, untouched and serene. Inside, the room was alive with quiet connection, human warmth, and the slow restoration of mental and emotional strength. Every shared story, every gentle laugh, became part of the healing process, allowing each traveler to rebuild confidence and prepare for the journey ahead. And so, huddled near the stove, the stranded travelers experienced a different kind of warmth, one born from shared stories, growing friendships, and the reassurance that, together, they could face whatever lay ahead on the snow-covered tracks. By mid-morning, the warmth of the stove had fully restored energy to the travelers. Tired limbs felt lighter, and faces that had been etched with fatigue now carried a subtle glow of renewed vitality. The tea and light breakfast had done their work, providing nourishment and comfort, and the soft hum of conversation continued to fill the small station. The station master, attentive as always, stepped toward the doorway and carefully peered outside. He gestured for the others to join him. "The snow has settled more," he said quietly. "It's still deep in places, but the wind has calmed. I think we can make progress if we proceed carefully." The travelers gathered near the entrance, brushing snow from coats and boots, stretching tired muscles and observing the winter landscape beyond the station. The sun had risen higher, casting a soft, pale light that glinted off the snow and illuminated the tracks faintly beneath its white blanket. The older man with the gray mustache adjusted his coat and leaned on his cane. "We need to stay close," he said, his voice calm but firm. "The snow may be stable in some places, but caution is still necessary." His words were met with nods of agreement. Children, eager and curious, peered out from behind their parents, noticing small bird tracks and the delicate patterns of frost on shrubs. Their excitement was tempered by guidance and reassurance, as the adults ensured that everyone understood the need for careful movement. The station attendant brought out a small map, carefully drawn, showing the safest paths along the tracks and indicating possible resting spots. The college students studied it, pointing out areas where the snow might be softer or firmer, discussing the best route for the group. Their voices were quiet but purposeful, reflecting the seriousness of the task and the confidence gained from the morning's recovery. As plans were made, blankets and small bundles were gathered. Each traveler ensured that they carried only what was necessary, distributing weight evenly and checking that children and older passengers were ready for the slow trek. The stove's warmth lingered behind them, a comforting reminder of safety and rest, even as they prepared to face the cold again. A gentle murmur of encouragement passed among the travelers. "We've made it this far," whispered one young mother to her child. "Together, we'll make it further." The words, simple and heartfelt, resonated with everyone, reinforcing the shared resolve that had carried them through the long, frozen night. Outside, the wind had softened, and the snow glimmered under the morning sun. The tracks, still partially obscured, now offered a faint guide forward. Every careful glance, every quiet discussion, prepared the group mentally and emotionally for the next stage of their journey. And so, with renewed energy, shared determination, and careful planning, the stranded travelers readied themselves to leave the safety of the station. The long night had tested patience and resilience, but now, bolstered by warmth, food, and companionship, they were ready to move forward into the still snow-covered world, step by careful step. With careful movements, the travelers stepped out of the safety of the small station once again. The crisp morning air greeted them, carrying the faint scent of pine and the lingering freshness of recently fallen snow. Each footfall made a soft, deliberate crunch, the sound echoing quietly in the still winter morning. The teenage girl held her younger brother's hand tightly, guiding him over a particularly deep drift. His small boots sank into the powder, and she leaned slightly to steady him, whispering words of encouragement. Every step was measured, careful, and mindful of the hidden patches of ice beneath the snow. The older man with the gray mustache tested the ground ahead with his cane before each step. A college student stayed close, offering a supportive arm and soft, reassuring words whenever necessary. Their teamwork was quiet, precise, and filled with unspoken understanding, a reflection of the long night they had endured together. The young mother lifted her child over patches of deeper snow, pausing occasionally to adjust the layers of blankets wrapped around him. Each gentle movement reminded them all of the importance of care, patience, and attention in the harsh winter landscape. The station master led the way, identifying firmer paths and safer routes along the snow-covered tracks. Occasionally, he stopped to examine footprints or the subtle texture of the snow, ensuring that each step forward was as secure as possible. His calm presence provided reassurance, and the travelers drew confidence from his steady guidance. Children laughed softly when their boots sank into deeper powder, or when they discovered delicate animal tracks alongside the tracks. The small moments of joy provided lightness to the otherwise slow and careful trek, reminding everyone of the beauty of the frozen world around them. The snow stretched endlessly, unbroken except for the travelers' footprints, which marked their progress and perseverance. Each step, though small, felt symbolic, a reminder of resilience, patience, and the shared determination to move forward together. The gentle warmth of the stove from the station lingered in their memories, giving a subtle comfort as they faced the cold again. Though the journey was slow and deliberate, the travelers moved with quiet resolve, appreciating the strength and companionship that had carried them through the long night. Even as minor challenges arose, hidden ice, uneven snow, or small drifts, the travelers adapted patiently. Hands were offered, steps steadied, and soft words of encouragement passed along the line. Every act of care reinforced the quiet bond that had formed during the night's ordeal. And so, with careful, deliberate steps, the stranded travelers began their cautious journey along the snow-covered tracks. The long, frozen night was behind them. The first light of day illuminated their path, and the quiet promise of warmth, safety, and progress guided their way forward into the still, glimmering winter landscape. After some careful steps along the snow-covered tracks, the travelers came upon their first significant challenge. A stretch of deeper snow, covering a gentle, yet slippery, incline. The path was narrow, and each step required attention, balance, and patience. The teenage girl hesitated for a moment, gripping her younger brother's hand tightly. His small boots sank deeper than expected, and she leaned slightly to support him. "We'll go slowly," she whispered. "Step by step, together." The older man with the gray mustache tested each step with his cane, feeling the subtle shifts beneath the snow. A college student stayed beside him, offering a steadying arm whenever the older man's footing seemed unsure. Each careful movement was deliberate, a quiet dance of coordination and trust. The young mother lifted her child over a particularly deep patch, ensuring the blankets stayed wrapped snugly. "Hold my hand, sweetie," she murmured softly. The boy's small fingers clutched hers, and together they navigated the incline with careful, deliberate steps. The station master led the way, demonstrating the safest route and pausing to allow each traveler to follow. He pointed out patches where the snow was firmer, and gently advised where to place each foot. His calm presence reassured the group, reminding them that patience and attention were their best tools. Children occasionally giggled softly, slipping slightly and catching themselves with the parents' help. The minor stumbles were met with laughter, encouragement, and gentle guidance rather than frustration. Each small success became a shared victory, reinforcing the bond between travelers. The cold air bit at their cheeks, but the memory of the stove's warmth and the cozy interior of the station lingered, offering a comforting contrast. Every step forward reminded them of the safety they had left behind, but also of the confidence they had gained from surviving the frozen night. The deeper snow slowed their progress, but it also encouraged teamwork. Hands were held, arms offered, and soft words of encouragement passed along the line. Each traveler felt the quiet reassurance of others' presence, the shared strength that had carried them so far. By the time they reached the top of the small incline, every traveler paused to catch their breath. A sense of accomplishment spread quietly among them, proof that patience, care, and cooperation could overcome even the first real obstacle of their winter journey. And so, step by careful step, helping one another and moving with calm determination, the stranded travelers continued along the snow-covered tracks. The challenges of the frozen landscape were real, but so was their resilience, and together, they discovered that even the deepest snow could be overcome with patience, attention, and the quiet strength of human companionship. After carefully navigating the incline, the travelers came upon a small creek, partially frozen and bordered by snow-covered banks. The water beneath the thin ice whispered quietly, reminding them that even the most beautiful winter scenes could hold hidden challenges. The teenage girl paused at the edge, looking down at the icy surface. She held her younger brother's hand tightly, bending slightly to steady him. "We need to be careful," she whispered. "Step slowly, and we'll get across together." The older man with the gray mustache examined the ice carefully, tapping with his cane to test its strength. A college student stayed close, ready to offer support if needed. "One step at a time," he said softly, his voice steady and reassuring. The young mother carefully lifted her child, ensuring that the small bundles of blankets remained secure. Every movement was deliberate, a quiet rhythm of caution and patience. The child's wide eyes took in the sparkling ice, and the gentle flow beneath it. His excitement mingled with awe and slight apprehension. The station master guided the travelers, pointing out where the ice was firmest and the snow offered the most stable footing. He instructed everyone to move slowly, testing each step before placing full weight, and to watch for hidden patches of slippery ice. Children giggled softly when their boots sank slightly into softer snow along the banks. But a guiding hand prevented slips from turning into falls. Every small success was met with encouraging smiles and quiet praise, reinforcing the growing bond of trust among the travelers. The cold air was crisp, but the memory of the stove's warmth lingered, providing a comforting contrast to the chilly creek. Every careful step reminded them of the long night they had survived, the challenges they had overcome, and the strength of moving forward together. By the time the travelers reached the opposite bank, a sense of quiet relief settled over the group. Hands were shaken, smiles exchanged, and small murmurs of pride filled the air. The crossing had tested their patience, balance, and teamwork, but the success strengthened their confidence for the rest of the journey. And so, continuing with slow, careful steps, the stranded travelers moved past the creek, each step forward a testament to cooperation, patience, and the resilience born from enduring a long, frozen night together. The journey was still demanding, but the quiet triumph of this crossing reminded them that obstacles, no matter how daunting, could be overcome when hearts and hands worked together. As the travelers continued along the snow-covered tracks, faint shapes began to appear on the horizon. At first, they were indistinct, just shadows against the pale winter sky. But as the group approached, the shapes grew clearer. Rooftops peeking above snowdrifts, faint columns of smoke curling into the cold air, and small glimmers of light shining from distant windows. The teenage girl's eyes widened. "Look, a village," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet awe. Her younger brother pressed close to her side, pointing eagerly at the distant glow. The older man with the gray mustache nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the scene. "It seems someone is awake. And expecting visitors, perhaps?" he murmured. His voice carried calm reassurance, helping to steady the group's growing anticipation. The young mother held her child tightly, encouraging him to enjoy the sight without rushing. "See the lights? That's where we're headed," she said softly. "We'll be safe soon." The boy's eyes sparkled with excitement, reflecting the distant lights as if they were stars. The station master led the group forward, pointing out the faint paths that appeared more stable and less snow-covered. "We're close now," he said quietly. "Step carefully, but we're almost there." His calm, measured tone instilled both patience and confidence in the travelers. The college students whispered to one another, noting small details. A barn partially visible behind the snow-covered roofs, the outline of a fence, the way the smoke rose steadily, signaling warmth and activity inside. Every observation increased their sense of hope and direction. Even the children became quieter, captivated by the gentle signs of life. The small village, partially hidden by snow and distance, seemed like a beacon of safety after hours of walking in the frozen wilderness. The travelers' pace remained deliberate, cautious, and steady. Each step brought them closer to the warmth and security that awaited, but the anticipation added a subtle excitement that made the journey feel lighter. They glanced at one another, exchanging quiet smiles of encouragement. The snow reflected the morning light, sparkling softly as if guiding them forward. Every glimmer of the distant village seemed to whisper reassurance that their endurance, patience, and teamwork would soon be rewarded. And so, with hearts lifted by the sight of distant lights and the promise of shelter, the stranded travelers moved carefully along the tracks. The frozen night was long past, but the day's journey continued, now buoyed by hope, gentle anticipation, and the quiet knowledge that warmth and safety were just ahead. As the travelers drew nearer to the village, the outlines of houses, barns, and fences became clearer. Smoke rose steadily from chimneys, curling into the crisp morning air, signaling warmth and human activity within. Soft glimmers of light reflected off the snow, guiding the group forward like beacons. The teenage girl squeezed her younger brother's hand gently. "We're here," she whispered, her voice a mix of relief and awe. The boy's eyes widened, and a small laugh escaped him as he looked around at the cozy, snow-dusted buildings. The older man with the gray mustache adjusted his cane, his gaze sweeping across the village. "Finally," he murmured, "a place where the storm hasn't defeated life, yet it has reminded us of its power." His voice carried calm gratitude, and the travelers felt a subtle sense of closure after the long ordeal. Villagers began to emerge, drawn by the sound of footsteps and the sight of the group approaching. Their faces were kind, curious, and welcoming. One man, bundled in thick winter clothing, stepped forward. "You've come a long way," he said warmly. "Come in, warm yourselves by the fire. We'll help you however we can." The travelers exchanged glances, their tired faces lighting up with cautious relief. The teenage girl led her brother forward, stepping carefully over a small drift near the path. The young mother held her child tightly, guiding him toward the welcoming voices. The station master and the college students coordinated quietly, ensuring that everyone moved safely across the snow-covered streets. They thanked the villagers softly as they were guided into the warmth of a large communal room, where a fire blazed brightly and the air smelled faintly of cooked bread and hot tea. Children ran ahead, eyes wide with curiosity, while the adults followed more deliberately, still cautious but visibly relieved. The villagers offered blankets, hot drinks, and simple reassurances, ensuring that each traveler felt safe and comfortable. The older man took a deep breath, letting the heat of the fire seep into his chilled bones. The teenage girl wrapped a borrowed shawl around her shoulders, feeling the comforting warmth and the quiet reassurance that the journey, though long and difficult, had reached a haven. Soft conversations began to ripple through the room, stories of the traveler's journey shared in whispers, laughter mingling with sighs of relief. The warmth of human kindness, coupled with the fire and hot drinks, replaced the memories of the cold and the challenges of the tracks. And so, surrounded by welcoming villagers and the gentle comfort of a warm room, the stranded travelers experienced the first true sense of rescue. After the long night, the frozen tracks, and the careful journey, they found safety, warmth, and a profound reminder of the enduring kindness that awaited even after the harshest trials. The travelers settled into the warmth of the village's communal room, where a large stove radiated heat that reached every corner. Blankets and shawls were offered to those who needed them, and mugs of steaming tea were placed carefully in front of the weary group. The teenage girl wrapped herself in a soft blanket, feeling the comforting warmth seep into her tired limbs. Her younger brother nuzzled against her side, enjoying the quiet security of being inside and away from the relentless cold. The young mother adjusted her child on her lap, handing him a small piece of bread and watching with gentle relief as he nibbled happily. The older man with the gray mustache leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment and letting the warmth ease the stiffness in his muscles. The night's ordeal, the frozen tracks, and the careful steps through deep snow now felt like a distant memory, softened by the gentle comfort of the fire and kind human presence. The villagers moved quietly among the group, offering hot food, simple bread, warm soup, and small portions of cooked meat to restore energy. Each traveler accepted with gratitude, savoring the nourishment and the reminder that survival was more than endurance. It was also care and kindness from others. Soft conversations began, laughter mingling with quiet sighs of relief. Travelers shared snippets of their night's journey, the frozen tracks, the cautious steps, the moments of fear, and the small victories. Each story brought smiles, nods, and gentle reassurances, forging a subtle bond between the villagers and the travelers. Children explored quietly, examining the room with wide eyes, but always returning to the safety of their parents' laps. The warmth, the aroma of fresh bread, and the gentle glow of the stove created an atmosphere of calm and security. Even small gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a shared smile, or a sip of tea reinforced the sense of togetherness and relief. The college students checked on each traveler, ensuring blankets were secure and everyone had enough food and drink. The older man sipped his tea slowly, savoring not just the taste but the quiet reassurance that they were safe. The teenage girl quietly hummed a small tune, and the soft sounds seemed to weave seamlessly with the crackling of the fire. Outside, the snow glimmered under the pale morning sun, pristine and undisturbed. Inside, the travelers allowed themselves to fully rest, body and mind recovering from the long, frozen night. The stove's warmth, the food, and the human kindness surrounding them created a quiet sanctuary, one that restored more than just physical strength, but also hope and calm. And so, as they rested, shared simple meals, and slowly regained energy, the stranded travelers experienced a profound sense of recovery. After the long night, the frozen tracks, and the cautious journey, they discovered that warmth, sustenance, and human connection could heal both body and spirit, providing the quiet courage to continue when the journey resumed. With their bodies warmed and hunger eased, the travelers began to speak more openly. Quiet murmurs turned into soft conversations, and gradually, stories of their individual journeys, fears, and hopes were shared. The teenage girl described her first experience walking through snow so deep, how she feared losing sight of her brother. Her voice trembled slightly, but the acknowledgement of her fear seemed to lighten the weight she had carried silently. Her younger brother, listening quietly, nodded in understanding, his own small fears mirrored in hers. The older man with the gray mustache spoke of winters past, recalling childhood memories of snow-covered fields and lessons in patience. His voice carried a warmth that extended beyond the fire, filling the room with gentle wisdom and perspective. The travelers listened, absorbed by the calm and steady tone, finding comfort in his reflections. The young mother shared stories of concern for her child's safety, and the subtle anxieties that had accompanied every step through the frozen landscape. Her voice was soft but filled with resolve, and others nodded in silent acknowledgement, recognizing their own similar fears. The college student spoke quietly of teamwork, strategy, and the unexpected beauty they had seen in the snow-covered world. Their words revealed a mix of admiration for the endurance of the group and a newfound respect for the fragile balance of nature and human determination. Children, now calm and content, occasionally offered small interjections, an observation about the snow, a question about the fire, or a giggle at a story. Each little comment added lightness to the room, reminding everyone of the simpler joys amidst the harsh journey they had endured. The station master and villagers listened and responded gently, encouraging the sharing without intrusion. Their presence was a steady reassurance, a subtle reminder that human kindness had endured alongside the frozen night. As the travelers shared, bonds strengthened quietly. Hands were touched in reassurance, soft smiles exchanged, and occasional laughter created a rhythm of camaraderie. Even brief moments of eye contact conveyed understanding, compassion, and a shared sense of relief. Outside, the snow continued to shimmer, pale sunlight reflecting off its untouched surface. Inside, the travelers found warmth not just from the fire and blankets, but from the collective human connection that had formed. Each story told, each fear voiced, and each hope shared deepened the sense of unity and mutual support. And so, in the gentle glow of the stove, surrounded by comfort, food, and new friendships, the stranded travelers experienced an emotional restoration as profound as the physical recovery. They discovered that beyond endurance and survival, the power of shared human experience, sympathy, understanding, and hope could sustain them even more deeply on the journey ahead. After several hours of rest and sharing stories, the travelers began to prepare for the next leg of their journey. The warmth of the stove still lingered in their bodies and memories, providing a sense of calm and reassurance as they organized their belongings. The station master and villagers helped them gather supplies. Small bundles of bread, jars of water, and packets of dried food were carefully distributed among the group. Blankets and cushions were offered for added comfort during the walk, and everyone made sure to pack lightly but efficiently. The teenage girl checked her backpack, ensuring that her younger brother's essentials were secured. She wrapped extra blankets around him, mindful of the chill that still clung to the morning air. Her careful attention reminded her of the responsibilities she carried, and the act of preparation gave her a sense of control after the long, frozen ordeal. The older man with the gray mustache double-checked his coat, ensuring layers were properly fastened and supplies accessible. The college students assisted him, offering support for the heavier bundles and steadying him as he tested the weight of his cane. Their quiet coordination reflected the teamwork that had developed over the past night. The young mother carefully arranged her child's belongings, making sure blankets were snug and water bottles within easy reach. Her child's small hands fidgeted with the corner of a shawl, and she smiled gently, encouraging patience and calm as they prepared. Villagers offered final words of advice and encouragement. "Follow the tracks carefully," one said. Step lightly, and watch for patches of ice. You'll reach the next station safely if you remain cautious." The travelers nodded, grateful for the guidance and the reassurance that the path ahead was mapped out with care. The group assembled near the door, each person adjusting scarves, gloves, and boots. The crisp winter air greeted them once more, and the soft crunch of snow beneath their feet marked the first cautious steps forward. Every movement was deliberate, measured, and reflective of the awareness they had developed over the past night. The warmth of the stove and the comfort of the village still lingered in their minds, a quiet source of reassurance as they left behind the temporary sanctuary. Every bundle carried, every hand held, and every glance exchanged reinforced their shared resilience and the bonds that had formed in adversity. And so, equipped with food, water, blankets, and the renewed strength born of rest and companionship, the stranded travelers stepped out into the snow once again. The frozen night was behind them, but the journey continued, now guided by careful preparation, teamwork, and the quiet hope of reaching their next destination safely. With their supplies secured and bodies rested, the travelers moved along the snow-covered tracks with greater confidence. The lessons of the previous night and morning guided their every step, helping them navigate the uneven surfaces and hidden ice with care. The teenage girl led her younger brother steadily, adjusting her pace to match the firmness of the snow beneath their feet. "Remember, one step at a time," she whispered, echoing the words she had learned in the long night. Her brother's small boots pressed into the powder cautiously, but each careful step built both his confidence and hers. The older man with the gray mustache leaned slightly on his cane, testing each step before committing his weight. A college student stayed close, offering subtle support when the older man paused or hesitated. Their quiet teamwork created a rhythm, a silent understanding that guided them forward. The young mother walked with her child snug against her side, holding his hand as they navigated small drifts and patches of icy snow. Her careful attention and steady pace reassured not only the child but the group around her, creating a quiet sense of shared responsibility. The station master pointed out subtle changes in the snow texture, identifying safer paths, and advising when to shift weight or take smaller steps. The travelers followed these cues attentively, their confidence growing with each successful move. Children occasionally laughed softly when their boots sank deeper than expected or when they discovered fresh animal tracks. These moments of curiosity and joy lightened the mood, reminding everyone of the beauty and quiet magic of the winter landscape. The warmth and comfort of the village, and the stove that had sustained them, remained vivid in their memories. Each careful step forward was a bridge between the comfort they had left behind and the hope of reaching the next safe haven. The travelers encouraged one another with quiet words. "Almost there. Good step. Careful now." Each phrase reinforced trust, patience, and the shared experience that had bonded them through the frozen night. By mid-morning, the group had found a steady rhythm. Their movements were deliberate, coordinated, and increasingly confident. The snow, though still cold and deep, no longer felt as daunting. Every step forward was a testament to endurance, teamwork, and the quiet power of learned experience. And so, guided by the wisdom of their recent trials, the stranded travelers continued along the snow-covered tracks. Each step carried them closer to safety, to warmth, and to the quiet reassurance that even in a harsh winter landscape, Careful preparation, patience, and shared effort could overcome the coldest challenges. The snow-covered path was mostly smooth, but as the travelers continued, they encountered small obstacles. Fallen branches hidden beneath fresh snow, minor drifts forming soft ridges, and patches of uneven ice. Each hazard required careful observation and deliberate steps. The teenage girl stepped cautiously over a small branch, bending slightly to ensure her brother followed safely. "Watch your footing," she whispered, guiding him with gentle patience. Her younger brother followed, learning the subtle art of balance from her careful movements. The older man with the gray mustache paused before a small drift, tapping it lightly with his cane to test its firmness. A college student offered a hand, helping him step safely over the obstacle. "Easy," the student said softly, and the older man smiled, appreciating the quiet support. The young mother lifted her child carefully over a snow-covered mound, adjusting blankets and scarves to ensure warmth. Her attention to detail reminded the group of the importance of care and vigilance in the icy landscape. The station master pointed out minor hazards along the track, suggesting the safest line of travel. "Step lightly here," he advised, "and shift your weight gradually. The snow may look firm, but can hide soft patches beneath." The travelers nodded, following his guidance precisely. Small giggles came from the children as their boots sank into hidden drifts or brushed against fallen branches. Each minor stumble was met with encouragement and careful guidance rather than panic, reinforcing the quiet trust and cooperation that had grown among the group. The warmth of the village and the comfort of the stove remained in everyone's minds, providing a mental anchor against the biting cold. Every careful step over obstacles reminded the travelers of their resilience and the lessons learned from the previous night. As frozen ordeal, with each successfully navigated obstacle, confidence grew. Hands were held, arms offered, and soft words of encouragement continued to pass along the line. The group moved as a cohesive unit, each member aware of their own steps as well as the well-being of those nearby. By midday, the travelers had overcome several minor challenges, each small victory strengthening both morale and trust. The snowy landscape, while still demanding, now seemed navigable, and the shared effort created a quiet rhythm of movement, cooperation, and assurance. And so, with careful attention, teamwork, and growing confidence, the stranded travelers continued along the tracks. Each small obstacle was a test of balance, patience, and cooperation. And with each success, they moved closer to safety, warmth, and the reassurance that together, even the most subtle challenges could be overcome. As the travelers advanced along the snow-covered tracks, they came upon a larger obstacle, a steep, snow-laden slope partially blocking the path. Unlike the smaller drifts and branches they had navigated earlier, this barrier demanded careful planning, coordination, and patience. The teenage girl paused at the base, studying the incline with her younger brother by her side. "We can do this together," she whispered, "one step at a time, helping each other." Her words were met with quiet nods of agreement from nearby travelers, reinforcing the collective determination. The older man with the gray mustache examined the slope, testing small patches with his cane. A college student crouched nearby, offering to support him as he climbed carefully. "Lean on me when you need," the student said softly. and the older man appreciated the steady presence beside him. The young mother assessed the best way to help her child over the slope. She adjusted blankets and ensured that he held tightly onto her hand. "We'll take it slowly," she said. Each movement was deliberate, each step measured to prevent slips or fatigue. The station master gathered the travelers briefly, outlining a plan. "We'll move one at a time," he explained. "Those who are steadier can assist others. Watch the footing, use branches or rocks for balance, and encourage each other." The group listened attentively, understanding that strategy and teamwork were essential for this challenge. The climb began with careful steps, hands offered and accepted, and whispered guidance shared along the line. Children were guided gently, their small feet following closely behind more confident travelers. Every success, even a single step upward, was met with quiet smiles and murmured praise. The warmth and comfort of the stove and the village lingered in everyone's memory, providing reassurance that safety and rest were waiting at the end of the climb. Each step was a balance of caution and resolve, a reflection of lessons learned from the frozen night and morning journey. Occasionally, a traveler paused to adjust scarves, gloves, or blankets, ensuring that the cold did not sap energy. Each pause was brief but important, preserving strength and confidence for the continued ascent. By the time the group reached the top of the slope, a shared sense of accomplishment filled the air. Hands were shaken, soft laughter exchanged, and a quiet relief swept over the travelers. The obstacle had tested patience, coordination, and teamwork, but the group had prevailed together. And so, strengthened by their collective effort, careful planning, and unwavering support for one another, the stranded travelers resumed their journey along the tracks. The winter landscape remained challenging, but each step, each cooperative action, reinforced their confidence that even the most formidable obstacles could be overcome when hearts, hands, and determination worked together. The snow-covered tracks led the travelers into a small forest patch, where trees stood tall and heavy with winter's weight. The branches, blanketed in white, formed delicate arches over the path, creating a natural tunnel that glimmered in the pale sunlight. The sound of distant birds, small but persistent, added a gentle melody to the quiet winter world. The teenage girl paused for a moment, taking in the beauty. "Look at the trees," she whispered to her younger brother. "It's like walking through a frozen cathedral." The boy's eyes widened in wonder, momentarily forgetting the cold and the challenge. The older man with the gray mustache adjusted his cane and tested the uneven ground beneath the snow. Hidden rocks and frozen roots demanded careful steps. A college student moved alongside him, offering quiet guidance and occasional support to ensure safe footing. The young mother led her child carefully, pointing out small wonders along the path: the sparkle of ice on a branch, the faint tracks of a rabbit, the subtle shine of frost-covered berries. Each observation turned the challenging walk into a shared experience of awe and discovery. The station master reminded the group to stay alert. "Watch for fallen branches, slippery patches, and hidden roots. The forest is beautiful, but it can be unpredictable." The travelers followed his advice diligently, stepping with caution while still appreciating the surrounding wonder. Children occasionally tripped over soft drifts or slipped on hidden ice, but hands were extended instantly to help them regain balance. Encouraging words passed quietly along the line, reinforcing teamwork and trust as the group navigated the natural obstacles. The warmth and comfort of the village and stove remained in their minds, offering reassurance that the journey, though still challenging, would eventually lead to safety. Each careful step was a balance between vigilance and the quiet enjoyment of nature's beauty. The forest, though frozen and still, felt alive. The sunlight filtered through snow-laden branches, casting delicate shadows on the ground. Travelers exchanged brief smiles, appreciating the silent companionship and the peaceful scenery amidst their determined march. By the time they emerged from the forest patch, the travelers were both weary and refreshed. The challenge had tested their attention and coordination, but the natural beauty had lifted their spirits, reminding them of the quiet rewards of perseverance and careful observation. And so, guided by vigilance, teamwork, and the subtle joys of the frozen forest, the stranded travelers continued along the snow-covered tracks. Every step forward was a blend of caution, appreciation, and quiet resilience, a reflection of both the harshness and wonder of the winter landscape. After emerging from the small forest patch, the travelers approached a wide river, its waters frozen solid but glistening like glass under the pale winter sun. The surface reflected the sky and snow-dusted trees along the bank, creating a scene of breathtaking beauty. Yet the travelers knew that beauty could be deceptive. The frozen river was a serious challenge that required focus, caution, and cooperation. The teenage girl held her younger brother's hand tightly. "Stay close to me," she whispered. "One step at a time." His small boots pressed tentatively onto the icy surface, and she adjusted her grip to steady him. The older man with the gray mustache tested the river's edge with his cane, tapping carefully to ensure the ice could hold his weight. A college student remained at his side, ready to offer support if the ice shifted or cracked unexpectedly. The young mother lifted her child, ensuring he was safely balanced as they tested each step across the frozen expanse. Her eyes scanned the surface for cracks, subtle shifts in color, or thin patches guided by the station master's advice. The station master gathered the group briefly, outlining the safest route. Step lightly, keep weight centered, and use each other for support. We'll move slowly but steadily. Trust the group and trust the ice where it's firmest. The travelers nodded, absorbing every word, aware that caution was paramount. Children shuffled closely behind adults, hands firmly held. Occasional slips prompted gentle laughter and careful guidance, each minor incident reinforcing the importance of teamwork and attentiveness. Every step was deliberate, balancing movement with observation. The warmth and comfort of the stove and village still lingered in their minds, offering mental reassurance despite the cold and tension of the crossing. The sparkling ice, the reflection of sunlight, and the distant snow-covered trees created a visual reward for patience and courage. As the travelers progressed, each successful step strengthened confidence. The river, wide and intimidating at first glance, became navigable through careful planning, attention to detail, and quiet cooperation. By the time the group reached the far bank, relief and quiet pride filled the air. Hands were shaken, murmurs of encouragement passed along the line, and soft laughter celebrated the successful crossing. The frozen river, though beautiful, had demanded focus, trust, and teamwork, and the travelers had met that challenge together. And so, Stepping onto solid ground once more, the stranded travelers continued along the snow-covered tracks. Every obstacle overcome, whether a slope, a forest, or a frozen river, had strengthened their resilience, deepened their bonds, and reaffirmed that careful preparation, attention, and shared effort could see them safely through even the harshest winter trials. After crossing the frozen river, the travelers resumed their march along the snow-covered tracks, and soon distant signs of life began to appear. At first, it was just a faint glimmer, a tiny sparkle among the white expanse. But as they moved forward, the shapes grew clearer. A small cluster of buildings, the faint outline of a platform, and the soft glow of lamps flickering through windows. The teenage girl's eyes widened with a mixture of relief and excitement. "Look," she whispered to her younger brother. "I think it's the station, or a settlement." His small hand tightened around hers, and he looked toward the distant lights with renewed hope. The older man with the gray mustache scanned the scene carefully. "It seems the next stop is within reach," he murmured, his voice calm but tinged with encouragement. The travelers absorbed his words, drawing strength from his quiet confidence. The young mother adjusted her child in her arms, pointing toward the faint structures. "See the lights? That's where we're headed." "Almost there," she said softly. Her words brought a sense of calm determination, balancing excitement with caution. The station master led the group forward, identifying safer paths through the snow and subtle depressions in the terrain. "We're close now," he said. "Stay steady, watch your footing, and help one another if needed." The travelers nodded, aware that the final stretch demanded the same careful attention they had practiced all along. Children's laughter and soft chatter filled the air as the travelers drew closer to the lights. The sight of a platform and the distant outline of train tracks brought tangible motivation, reinforcing their endurance and perseverance. Every footstep felt lighter, propelled by the promise of safety and warmth. The memory of the stove's heat and the village's comforting embrace lingered, offering reassurance against the crisp winter air. The travelers' spirits lifted as the distant settlement grew more distinct. The shapes of buildings, chimneys, and flickering lamps becoming increasingly clear. By the time they reached the outskirts of the settlement, relief and quiet jubilation filled the group. Soft smiles, whispered words of encouragement, and subtle gestures of pride were exchanged. The next stop, the promise of shelter and warmth, was no longer a distant hope. It was within their reach. And so, with hearts lifted and steps purposeful, the stranded travelers moved toward the settlement. The journey had tested endurance, patience, and cooperation. But the sight of distant lights and signs of life reignited hope, motivating them to continue forward with renewed energy and quiet determination. As the travelers reached the outskirts of the small settlement, the soft glow of lamps and warm lights spilling from windows created an inviting and comforting scene. Every footstep on the crisp snow carried them closer to safety and relief. The teenage girl held her younger brother's hand firmly. "We're here," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet awe. The boy's eyes sparkled with excitement, reflecting the warm light ahead, and he tugged her gently forward. The older man with the gray mustache took a deep breath, savoring the sense of security the settlement offered. The snow, the frozen tracks, and the long night seemed to recede as he felt the warmth of human presence and kindness surrounding them. Villagers began to appear at doors and windows, curious but welcoming. One woman, bundled in thick winter clothing, stepped forward and spoke gently. "You've come a long way. Come in, warm yourselves by the fire. We'll help you in any way we can." Her words were filled with genuine kindness, and the travelers responded with grateful nods and smiles. The young mother led her child carefully, ensuring his warmth and safety as she guided him toward the cozy interiors. She exchanged polite thanks with the villagers, her tired but relieved eyes meeting their reassuring gazes. The station master coordinated quietly with the locals, ensuring that every traveler was accommodated, blankets provided, and food and hot drinks offered. The large stove inside radiated heat, its comforting warmth a reminder of the previous village, but amplified by the relief of being so close to the next safe haven. Children, now unburdened by fear, ran ahead cautiously, exploring the room with wonder. Adults followed more deliberately, each step measured but relaxed, absorbing the reassurance of the welcoming environment. Soft conversations filled the air. Stories of the journey shared in whispers, laughter blending with sighs of relief. Every gesture for a blankets, a hand on his shoulder, a shared smile reinforced the sense of community and security. The travelers, physically weary but emotionally lifted, felt the profound comfort of human kindness. The long frozen night and challenging journey had tested their endurance, patience, and courage. But now, surrounded by welcoming faces, warmth, and nourishment, they experienced true relief. And so, stepping fully into the settlement, the stranded travelers found the safety, care, and reassurance that had been their ultimate goal. Every challenge faced, every obstacle overcome, had led them to this moment, a reminder that even in the harshest winter trials, human compassion and cooperation could provide refuge, comfort, and hope. With the travelers finally settled in the welcoming settlement, the weight of the past frozen nights and the challenges of the journey began to ease. They sat quietly by the warm stove, each person wrapped in blankets, sipping hot tea, and reflecting on the long path they had traveled. The teenage girl gazed into the fire, thinking of the frozen tracks, the deep snow, and the moments of fear and uncertainty. She remembered how every careful step, every act of guidance, and every hand held had helped her and her brother survive the ordeal. It was a lesson in patience, vigilance, and trust. Her younger brother, resting quietly beside her, recalled the comforting voices, the small acts of kindness, and the sense of shared determination that had carried them through. Even in fear, there had been moments of laughter, beauty, and wonder. The sparkling forest, the frozen river, the subtle glow of distant lights, all of which had reminded them of hope. The older man with the gray mustache reflected on the journey with quiet satisfaction. He saw how cooperation, empathy, and courage had transformed a potentially perilous adventure into a story of resilience and human connection. Every step, from the village to the river, from the forest to the frozen slopes, had been a lesson in endurance and understanding. The young mother smiled softly as her child played nearby, noticing the bonds formed among the group. Shared experiences had created a silent network of trust, care, and friendship. The warmth of the stove, the comfort of food, and the human kindness surrounding them underscored a simple truth. Survival was not just about strength, but also about connection. The station master and villagers moved quietly among them, offering gentle reassurances, listening to stories, and sharing smiles. Their presence was a reminder that even brief moments of human kindness could leave lasting impressions. As evening fell, the travelers looked around the room and at one another, realizing that the frozen night, the obstacles, and the uncertain journey had shaped them. They had faced fear and fatigue, but they had also discovered courage, resilience, and the enduring power of human cooperation. In the quiet of the settlement, with the fire crackling softly and the night calm outside, the travelers felt a profound sense of peace. Every lesson learned, every challenge overcome, and every bond formed became a part of their story. A story they would carry with them long after the snow melted and the tracks disappeared beneath spring's thaw. And so, the stranded travelers, once cold, anxious, and uncertain, found warmth, safety, and reflection. Their journey had tested every aspect of their endurance. Yet it had also revealed the strength of the human spirit, the courage to persevere, the empathy to help others, and the quiet joy found in connection. The long night of 1906 had ended, leaving behind a story of survival, hope, and enduring humanity.